Hey everyone, thank you for joining me in session 197 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. I'm joined today by Drs. Bruce Tenor and Merrill Winston to discuss the talk that Merrill gave at the recent BABA conference that was held in Detroit. The full title of Merrill's talk is Whitesplaining Racism, Part Deux, Logic, Disproportionality, Avatars, Hate Crimes, and Uncomfortable Feelings. As you'll learn in this episode, Bruce was in the audience for most of Merrill's talk, and he was so excited about the subject matter, he wanted Merrill to come on this podcast to share the presentation with the audience. So here we are doing just that, and Bruce was kind enough to join us as a discussant. But in the first segment of the show, we get to know a little bit about Bruce and his background. It turns out that he's had quite a bit of success reducing the overall rates of restraint in the school he worked in, so he spent some time discussing how he was able to make such an incredible change. Bruce also closed out the show with some great advice for BCBAs, so you'll definitely want to stick around for that. And again, somewhere in the middle, we go through some of the main points of Merrill's talk. As you'll learn, it was pretty well received, and I think it's thought-provoking as many of Merrill's talks are. So I hope you enjoy the content as much as I did. This episode's pretty long, even by behavioral observation standards, so I'm going to try to keep my opening comments brief here. I do want to direct your attention that I have a lot of things in the show notes for today's episode, so there's lots of links there. I also have the graph of the reduction in restraints that Bruce and his team was able to effect. You can find this and all the other links, etc., over at the show notes at behavioralobservations.com. And I should also mention, if you're at the website, just sign up for the email list, and you can get the show notes emailed directly to you. You don't have to go to the website anymore or anything like that. Anything that we produce as far as show notes are concerned will just go right to your email inbox. And one other thing real quick, today's show is brought to you by Supervision Sidekick. Supervision Sidekick is not only a comprehensive curriculum that helps you mentor the next generation of behavior analysts, it's also a community of like-minded supervisors. Check out their easy-to-use digital platform and comprehensive instructional materials at sidekicklearning.net. Also, if you sign up for a monthly or yearly program, use coupon code Behavioral Observations and save 10% at checkout. We're also brought to you by BDS, Behavioral Development Solutions. I know firsthand about BDS because I used their modules to prepare for the exam back in 2002. They're so thorough, their modules are so thorough, you'll feel confident in entering the board exam and you'll be well prepared for your career. And they report a 98.5% pass rate for first-time exam takers and a money-back guarantee. They've got lots of other cool stuff too, like solutions for RBT candidates, CE courses, live webinars, and a whole lot more. So to learn more, go to bds.com/BOP for a special offer for podcast listeners. That's bds.com/BOP. And last but not least, the 2022 Stone Soup Conference is right around the corner on October 22nd. Or later, if you're busy that day, it'll be available on demand after the event. Come hear from Kirk Kirby, Drs. Camille Kolu, Nasia Cirencione-Ulizzi, Merrill Winston, Holly Gover, Tom Higbee, and Florence DeGennaro-Reed. It's going to be a great event. It's for a great cause. And it's a smoking deal, I should add, as well. It's really, really inexpensive. And if you want to make it even more inexpensive, use the promo code PODCAST at checkout. All right, that's it for opening remarks. Without any further delay, please enjoy this fun conversation with Merrill and Bruce.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Drs. Bruce Tenor and Merrill Winston, welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How are you guys doing today?
Very good. Thanks for having us, Matt.
Doing very well. Thank you, Matt.
Well, this is a conversation. We'll talk about how this conversation was, I guess, what the genesis of it was in a little bit. But it's a conversation I've had on my calendar and been looking forward to for quite a while now. So thanks for joining me, guys. Merrill is a pretty well-known guest to the Behavioral Observations podcast, having been on the show, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 times. and he and I get a chance to talk, quite often anyway. So I'd like to start with you, Bruce. I wanted get to know a little bit about your background and, have the audience have some context for who you are and the perspective you're bringing to the show. So let's start like we always do. Why don't you tell us how you found out about ABA and what made you want to pursue that as a career?
Sure. Thank you, Matt. Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of your show. So I tune into all your episodes. You do an excellent job. You do wonderful things for the field and allow other people to voice, what they do. So I really appreciate that. So
thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So my journey is a little, it's slightly a little different than many. So when I graduated high school, I wasn't kind of sure what I wanted to do. I just remember in high school, I took a class with a lot of our local police officers were either track coach, offensive football coordinator. And my one coach was in my senior year. He had taught a civics class. And then from there, I was like, okay, I might as well go to school to do something criminal justice. So I went to school to be in criminal justice, and I was ready to graduate. I took an education class. And when I took the class, the professor pulled me to the side and said, hey, I think you should be a teacher. And I was like, no, I don't want to be a teacher. He was like, hey, listen, you should be a teacher because you rather catch the kids early before you catch them too late. And I was just like, oh, okay, that sounds pretty cool. So we laid out some pros and cons, and I was like, all right. I was very apprehensive at first being a teacher because I was like, well, a couple of things. Number one, these rules violation or values violation, I don't think I can have a kid curse at me. And number two, the narrative couldn't be, I got beat up by a fifth grader. So I was a little concerned. I was like, I can't go to school, be a teacher, something happens to me. And all my friends are wondering, Bruce is getting beat up by these, fifth grade, sixth grade kids. I was like, I was very apprehensive. So I decided to go into education. I switched majors and, I went to early childhood and special education. Where I taught, and it was a great experience. I was a teacher for 1 year at the Allentown School District. I taught middle school. Then I went to taught special ed for early childhood for 10 years in New Jersey, up in the Phillipsburg School District and the Washington Borough School District. I taught 3-year-olds, 4-year-old special ed, taught kindergarten. So it was a wonderful experience. So then as I went to school, I was asked, I was going for my master's degree in special education, and I needed to take one more course. When I took the course, I took an administrative course, and then the professor said, hey, listen, you should really consider going for your leadership for your another master's degree in education leadership. I was like, well, I don't want to be a principal. I said, typically principals are, punitive. And I said, I don't want to deal with like 800 kids in the building. I'm good in my classroom. I love teaching. I love the kids. He goes, no, you should really consider it. So I just said, okay. So then I went to school, got my education leadership. And then when I took my internship, which is I think like 360 hours you needed, it was wonderful. I was like, wow, the systemic change you can make as a leader, it's pretty strong. So I was like, I love this. So then I got my leadership degree. I got a job at the Colonial Intermediate Unit in Pennsylvania. For those who don't know what intermediate units are, there's just service providers. They go out there and they provide, supports, a lot of special education, professional development for school districts. And we went out there and I worked for the autistic support program at the elementary level. And I did that for 4 years. And that's when I learned quickly, working with the complex population that, hey, listen, you may want to go out there and pursue your BCBA. If you're going to be supporting teachers and staff to really make sure you can support that population. So I ended up going, getting my BCBA. And then I left. I did that for 4 years. It was wonderful 4 years. Had great leadership, great support. Ended up going to now currently, I took a different challenge because I wanted to see, hey, can this science transition over to more of the, to a different population? So I applied and got a position as a building principal program administrator for the intensive emotional support program at the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. And there, you service students with, it's a disability category of emotional disturbance. So it was challenging. We had 90 restraints with 19 kids in the first 2 months. It was pretty intense. It was something I've never seen before in my career. Things, it was like, you thought lean on me was bad. It was tough. So, collaborated with my BCBA, collaborated with some folks in Pennsylvania from the patent office. We did a lot of work together. And we had a significant restraint reduction initiative to like really say, hey, we got to get these restraints down because this is not good for anyone, kids, adults. It's just very, traumatic for the whole program. We just started really putting together a strong token economy system, increasing effective evidence-based teaching methodologies. And restraints went down. Obviously, COVID hit, but as we came back, the beautiful thing about it, we almost tripled numbers of students in our program, and the restraints they barely crack double digits anymore per year. I think we just presented, myself and Ashley Harnett. She's one of the patent consultants, and she's a good friend of mine. And we presented together at the National Autism Conference on our program, and we did the numbers. We had 90 restraints the first 2 months in 2019. We had a total of 84 over the last 19 school months. And again, the population you're serving is pretty intense. So it's just the work, it's just the science of applied behavioral analysis. And it's just really showing that effective instruction and putting in the systems. It works across all people, all programs, all conditions, all settings, doesn't matter. So, so that's what I'm currently doing right now. I'm going into my 4th year is that. And I have a wonderful staff, awesome team of BCBAs, Christy Camano, Molly Juflis, and great teachers that really help the program. So that's what I'm currently doing right now.
What an incredible achievement to be able to make that change in all those students' lives. So that is just a great story. For those who aren't from the Northeast, can you just tell everyone what patent is? I'm sure there's some people in the Southwest or somewhere else in the country or maybe somewhere else in the world. Like, what is this patent thing he's talking about?
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
well, patent is a for the state of Pennsylvania. We have this wonderful thing called the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network. And what that do is the state provides supports, multiple different supports for so many different venues in the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, I would say, from the states that I'm familiar with, I don't know how every 50 states, but for Pennsylvania, I think they have one of the strongest as far as state support in regards to supporting. So for a patent, they have different initiatives for so many different, consultation they have an autism initiative, a behavioral initiative. They have so many different initiatives. So this one that we're working with, they have a strong autism initiative, a very strong one with very highly competent and skilled folks from the patent office. Mike Miklos, who recently retired. You had Dr. Rosella, Dr. Amiris DiPuglia. You have Ashley Harnett. You have the core people and other wonderful consultants, and they go out there into school districts and provide support and consultation. So the district would request them to come in there, and you have awesome consultants going in there working with the children, training staff on the science of implementing the science and effective instruction within the classroom, reducing problem behaviors, training districts, training leadership teams, training the staff. It's just a wonderful thing. So for this one, this wasn't because we're not an autistic support program, but I did pull. It was some supports within the folks who worked in the autism initiative, helped supported and other initiatives. And we were part of the behavioral initiative where they came out there and they supported the program for school-wide, supports within our buildings. So again, the patent initiative, it serves a lot of different, factions within the district, different areas of Pennsylvania. There's a patent central that focuses on the central region of Pennsylvania. There's patent east that focuses on the eastern side of Pennsylvania. Is patent west. So it's 3 different divisions, but they all work together to help support. It's a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful system.
Hey everyone, how are you developing the next generation of behavior analysts? We all know that providing quality supervision is hard, but Supervision Sidekick is here to help. Supervision Sidekick is the only supervision curriculum with comprehensive materials guaranteed to save you time, all while enhancing the quality of your supervision. But Supervision Sidekick is not just another curriculum. From foundations and ethics to interpersonal skills, over 43 evidence-based modules, assignments, and performance-based rubrics help you confidently develop competencies related to the 5th edition task list and beyond. And because you shouldn't have to supervise alone, membership includes access to monthly mentorship groups and community forums. To learn more, go to sidekicklearning.net and sign up for a sample of their curriculum for free. and experience their easy-to-use digital platform and comprehensive instructional materials, including a free feedback preference assessment survey and trainee interest and goals questionnaire. Join a community of supervisors using Supervision Sidekick to enhance your supervision. Again, go to sidekicklearning.net and sign up today. And use coupon code Behavioral Observations for 10% off their affordable monthly or yearly subscriptions. Yeah, Mike did a presentation. He came to the New Hampshire ABA conference a few years ago and did a really wonderful presentation. And like the amount of work that they've been able to accomplish in the state is just it's the envy of the nation for sure. So and Merrill, I promise we're going to get to you in just a second.
I forgot why we're here. I just learned about patent.
That's right. So Bruce, I'm curious. We didn't plan to talk about this, but with regard to that fantastic outcome you had with the reduction of the restraints, was there either a principle or applied or strategy at work?
Well, he was the principal.
Well, of course, yeah.
Have you not been paying attention?
That's right. What were a few key takeaways? What were a few large scale moves that you guys might have made to affect such an amazing outcome?
Well, the first thing we had to do was, we did like this, we had to do like assessments. So we did like the quality indicators for emotional support programs to just assess for the needs. And then from there, we had to immediately put in like a token economy system. So we created a school store, and this token economy systems, we had like obviously trained students that they're able to contact reinforcement more frequently when the appropriate responses occur. So students were getting tickets, and we were obviously pairing them, and we were verbal praise, social contact, social praise. And then, we would go daily. So whenever, students, have an emotional engage in the appropriate response that we're looking for, they contact reinforcement immediately. And then towards the end of the day, the whole school, we cash it out to get some objects. So we were buying stuff, getting things donated. And we started that kind of framework, just to ensure that the students are able just to understand that, hey, when you do good things happen, So that was kind of like something more immediate that we have to do. But once we started slowly seeing the trend go down, because the first month of September was like 44 restraints, and then October was 46. And then right around November, it was like 26, and it started slowly going down once we put it in there. But it was a lot of other things going on, a lot of elopement out of the classroom, a lot of other problem behaviors were occurring. So restraints were down, but there's still a lot, which is so then we started implementing some other aspects within the program. So we started just refining just the level of instruction, the delivery of the tickets, and put a token economy, but also effective instruction as well too. Because many times, we're in school, right? So many of the issues are escape maintained behaviors. I don't want to be in school. I don't want to work. I don't want to. Writing's a problem. It's been aversive to me. Sitting for a long duration of time, has become aversive, or, there's a lot of skill deficits. So you're trying to teach some concept that you don't have really information. So you think a child knows because he's, verbally competent, but there's a lot of skill deficits. So then you see that. Yeah. So those are these little things I had to, as a team, we had to assess to find out, well, there's a lot of gaps, we had to fill these gaps in there. So again, the first thing was that token economy system that was very effective. And we tweaked it up a little bit. It was just something you had to put in a framework right away just to calm things down because things were pretty intense. Mm-hmm. And then after that, we started just doing much more, systematizing a lot of things we're doing and analyzing the areas to how to refine this to make this function like a school. So, the goal is we have intensive emotional support students in our building. How can they function and operate as if neurotypical peers you'd see in a typical school? And that's the way we're running our building. We're running like these kids were, exceeded the amount of support that was offered in the district. Well, they come here, and if you walk in here, you wouldn't see the same kid that you saw over there too. Now, again, we have a lot of supports. We have smaller classroom sizes, a little bit more support. We have two, very strong, competent behavior analysts in there too. We have a social worker. So there's other supports in there, but still, it's, the goals for behavioral change, and the goal is to get them back into their home school and to in their district.
Wow, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. I'm tempted to ask a zillion more questions, but would never get onto the topic. That
it sounds like you stabilized them so fast and then move them forward when most people can't even stabilize them in the same period of time.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's the science. It's great support, great collaboration with staff. I have a wonderful teachers, wonderful teacher assistants. Our phys ed teacher, she's on board. Our social worker. We have great behavioral.
All the grown-ups agree, and the kids get better.
Hey, listen, when you're on crisis mode, you better agree. So we have great collaboration with the patent consultants. It was just, again, it's a team effort with all of us, and we all have the same vision. It's a strong culture. So that's what we are.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So back in June, I was aware that Merrill was going to BabaCon to deliver a presentation, and while he was there, he's messaging me. He's like, "Dude, I met the coolest guy, and he wants I'll let you guys fill in the blank." So I'd love to hear how you guys met, and what did you guys kind of bond over in terms of whether it's the setting, the content, or what have you. So bring us up to speed about how you guys ended up meeting each other, and why you wanted to come on the show and kind of chat a little bit about some of the stuff that Merrill was presenting and other things that you might have seen and heard at the conference.
So let me just explain briefly how this all went down. And a quick little backstory from Merrill.
Sure.
So my behavior analyst and I, Christy Camano, we've always talked about Molly Jufus. We're always talking about restraint. What can we do to just make it better? We're down to 10 a month. Now, how do we get it down to 5? Or this is actually 0. So we're always constantly debating. One of Merrill's fans is, one of our colleague from Patton. Her name is Ashley Harnett. And she would always talk about Merrill for such a long time. I'm like, okay, it's Merrill. I'm hearing about this guy. I say, I gotta hear him. So me and my behavior analyst, we're talking one time early in the morning on the way to work. And then I get a link from Ashley about, restraints in schools. I'm like, okay, this is great. And I got another link from your podcast, the one you did too, about how your behavior plan stinks.
Oh, yes.
I'm like, man, this guy, I'm listening to him. I'm like, man, this guy is like, whoa, he's cutting edge. He's cutting the mold. Like, I've never heard a behavior analyst talk like this. I thought they were supposed to talk, very analytic and very, man, this guy's letting it. But he's making sense and he's sticking to the science, and wow, this guy's powerful. And it makes a lot of sense. I'm like, this guy's awesome. So in June, and this is back last year, this is early fall. So I'm listening to him multiple times. I'm hearing his voice. Fast forward, I heard about this awesome conference called Baba. When I got an email from Baba about it, I'm thinking it's like, this is probably fake. So I researched, I'm like, oh no, this is, well, because you get these emails, I'm like, oh, you got this conference from like the ABA, like the BACB. I'm like, oh, come on, another link. So I'm ready to click it, but I'm reading it. I'm like, oh, let me just investigate. So I read it. I'm like, oh my God, this conference, like this organization looks phenomenal. And for those who don't know, Baba is like, Black Applied Behavior Analyst. It's an organization. And I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. So, long story short, they asked, we're looking for speakers, and we had a conversation, and they asked me, applied, and I was asked to speak on, due process hearings for children with autism outcomes in Pennsylvania. That was part of my dissertation topic that I did. And then I went out there and I spoke. But before I spoke, I was, I had the agenda up looking, and I walk into the room. Well, first, before that, I see a guy, he's sitting catty corner, and there's a big conference, and everyone's talking and they're asking questions. And I just see this guy, he's answering all the tough questions. And I'm like, who is this guy? I'm sitting behind Merrill. I can't really see him. I'm like, all right, this guy's asking a lot of answering a lot of the questions. And someone's presenting on a couple things. And he was just answering them. I'm like, all right. The same guy, everyone leaves. I walk in there and I'm talking to him. And I'm talking to him when he's talking. And then Merrill, he made a mention about, something about like controversy, because I read his slide. When I walked into the room, he's prepping for his presentation.
Yeah.
I walk in there and I'm just watching. I'm like, oh, I want to see that one. I want to see it. So my first instinct was, holy moly, this guy's really going to talk about what we're going to talk about later in here. I'm like, wow. I'm like, that's pretty impressive and cutting edge that he has, he has enough courage to go in this conference and talk about these issues about biasness and racism. I said, this is great. So I said, I got to see this presentation. And he's talking. I'm hearing his voice. I'm like, why does that voice sound familiar? Because I didn't see his name up there. And he pops up and he starts talking. And he made a reference about behavioral observations. He made a reference about the restraints. And I'm like, holy moly, you're not Dr. Merrill Winston, are you? He's like, yeah, I am. I'm like, holy cow. I'm like, are you kidding me? I said, I have been hearing about you. I've been listening to your stuff for almost a year or so right now. Finally get to meet you. I said, I got to sit down here and listen to this. He was like, okay. So I go there, I sit down, I'm listening to his presentation. I'm like, wow, this is a powerful presentation. I said, he has a lot of courage, presenting on information that we'll get into, later. And I said, this is great. I had to leave because I had to present after him. So I had to leave 5 or 10 minutes prior. I didn't get to finish it, but I did my presentation. At the end at BABA conference up in Detroit, Michigan, we had a little ceremony at the end, at a site off campus. And we were just talking. And I ran into him. I said, listen, your presentation was extremely powerful. And I commend you for your courage. I said, you have to, present again or do a part 2. He's like, I could have got into it more. I said, no, you got to do that again. And he's like, hey, would you want to come chat with me about this? I'm like, yeah. He goes, I'll be right back. And came back and said, and they came back 5 minutes later. It's like, all right, we're on. I said, what do you mean we're on? He was like, yeah, we gotta have this dialogue. I said, let's do it.
Hey everyone, this part of the podcast is brought to you by Behavior Development Solutions, the exam prep strategy that I used way back in the day to take the exam. They have a 98.5% pass rate for first-time BCBA exam takers. There's also a money-back guarantee, and their modules are so thorough that you'll feel confident walking into that exam, and you'll be well prepared for your career. They also have solutions for RBT aspirants, CE courses, and live webinars, most of which are free to attend. And today I want to specifically mention their Journal Club series, a unique continuing education offering that strives to increase scholarly activities and discussion amongst BCBAs and BCABAs. And all these sessions are run by Dr. Nicole Bank. So head over to bds.com/BOP for a special offer. And whether you're in exam prep mode or not, you'll want to check it out. So again, go to bds.com/BOP. All right, let's get back to this conversation. All right, so we're talking around this presentation. Merrill, why don't you introduce the title of the presentation? And I've got a specific question for Bruce after that.
Yeah, the title was Whitesplaining Racism Part Deux, which is a Hot Shots reference, Charlie Sheen movie. Logic, Disproportionality, Avatars, Hate Crimes, and Uncomfortable Feelings. This is the full title.
All right, so Bruce, you already mentioned that Merrill, So what reaction did you have? You said you thought he was courageous, but here you have a guy, an older white guy, giving a
chronologically advanced. Excuse me.
Yes, a chronologically advanced, white guy giving a talk about racism at BABA. What was your reaction to that? And then we certainly can get into some of the highlights of the actual message itself that you're trying to convey, Merrill. We'll certainly get to that in a second. But I'm just kind of curious what of the talk that you did see, what was going through your mind as he's laying this out?
I'm like, holy cow! Is this guy got a he's very brave to go over and talk about this.
Nice self-edit there.
That's right.
And I'm like, well, he's really brave. I'm like, is this guy? I'm like, I gotta. And this is again before I even knew he was presenting, because I didn't get to see the agenda of who was presenting. So I was like, whoa. And then I was like, well, if BABA approved it because it's a Black organization, then obviously the content must be something that needs to be heard. Then I just sat back and reflected. I was like, this is. I personally, this is my opinion, and we'll get into a little bit more too. But I said, if he, this is where it all starts, right? Like we got to start having conversations, not just with folks in the Black community, but you got to have folks from outside the community talk about these issues, in an open discussion to learn about it, and also in a problem-solving manner. So I think that's where that's what when he was speaking, that's what I was thinking.
Got it. So Merrill, I saw the slides of the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a couple of themes kind of jumped out at me, and I was wondering if we can kind of just
Sure.
kind of go through them. And so there's a couple of things that like I said jumped out. You talked a lot about establishing premises, deductive reasoning and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the concept of disproportionality and this thing called avatars and hate crimes. So I'd like you to kind of go through those, if you will, and kind of briefly describe your frame of reference, the rationale for including these topics and how that fits into the, perhaps the main message that you were trying to get across. And certainly Bruce would, like we were talking about earlier, certainly jump in with, any thoughts, reactions, et cetera, that you might have.
Well, a lot of this, the whole talk, this is actually a part two. The first part was about definitions of racism, how people view it, how anthropologists view race, which anthropologists don't believe there is a basis for saying there's different races, but these are anthropologists. There's all kinds of ways of looking at it, but that was the first part of it. And it looked at some things like just like how the United States defines who is white, who is black, how they define the different races and how other countries do it. So there's a little bit of an examination of that. But that was in an earlier version. So in this version, it kind of, the whole thing started with something that happened to my stepson, Weston, which is it happens to a lot of people. And that is people questioning whether a remark is racially motivated. And it all started with, this is actually the second time this thing happened to Weston. Something similar happened to him when he was even younger, but he was in a place, it was an unfamiliar neighborhood. He was supposed to meet some kids for a basketball game. There's only one kid in the area walking towards him. He happened to be black. And Weston says, "Hey, dude, do you happen to know where the basketball court is?" And the young man immediately says, "Whoa, did you just ask me that because I'm black?" And then Weston, who's kind of a smart aleck like me, said, "Well, did you just ask me that because I'm white?" And then they both kind of had like a little, just like a, standoff for a second, and nothing devolved. No one called anybody names. There was no fight. They both kind of just questioned each other's motives for a moment. And I took that example and I was like, well, what are the rules going on there that people are using? So, and now they may not be actually using them, but how would you extract a rule from that? What would it look like? And so that's where I started wondering also, not only what rule was the young man using who thought Weston might be racist, but what rules was Weston using? Like, when he countered. And then I started thinking about correlation, causality, how people get to the stereotypes of racial stereotypes in the first place. And a lot of that led me to just a lot of faulty logic and flawed, what we call major premises. And
did Weston eventually find the basketball court? That's what I want to know.
He eventually did.
Okay,
yeah.
Right.
After realizing how racist he was. No. Or at least, my comment to him was like, Weston, you should have at least had like an autoclitic at the front of that going like, dude, this is going to sound totally racist, but you're the only person here. Do you happen to know where the basketball court is? Now, maybe that would have affected the outcome. Maybe it wouldn't have. I really don't know. But, but that's part of the discussion, is that if you had the presence of mind to say, dude, this is going to sound really racist, so I'm going to apologize in advance. At least it says to the other person, I'm thinking about how this is going to affect you. I'm not just saying whatever I'm going to say. You know what I mean? So, and I'm not saying that Weston should have said that or that everyone should do that. I'm just saying thinking about these things is important. How does it? I just saw something on LinkedIn about that posted by a black man, and he was saying how he realized he was walking near this lady who was like unloading her car, and she didn't realize he was walking nearby. And he was very concerned about startling her. And he's wondering, should I make a shuffling foot noise so she'll know I'm here so I won't freak her out? And the point that he made was, a white guy like me wouldn't think that. And so, those were the kinds of things that got me to start thinking about this. Like, what are the rules people use? What are the premises they hold? Like this. And by the way, I'm not even saying that the young black kid had this rule in his head. I'm saying that when you look at how people behave, you can sometimes extract rules. So one might look like, if you're a white kid who doesn't know me and the first words out of your mouth are about basketball, then you might be a racist. And maybe he was thinking that, maybe he wasn't, I don't know. But my point is that's how you would draw that whole thing out in a logical syllogism. So the premise would be like, if you're a black person who'd been asked this a million times, that if someone of another race asks you and the first words out of their mouth are about basketball, that's it. They're just stereotypical. They're not even trying to figure out who you are, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure some people do have rules like that, either that they just kind of like follow without really stating them, or maybe they have stated them, or maybe they actually state them to the person, like this young man did to Weston, basically. He said that Weston's making a conditional discrimination and that you would not have asked this to a white person. You would ask the white person where the hockey rink is or something, which is also in the presentation. We talk about hockey, but anyway, that's kind of where it came from. And it was, then I kind of started thinking about, what do people hold as true? And so part of the presentation, and this actually applies to behavior analysis and to everything that you don't actually have data for. And we, even as behavior analysts, we behave according to rules that we make, many rules that we make that we don't have data for. We just use our experience, or it's our bias, or it makes us feel comfortable. But there are 9 levels of certainty. And this goes into how people like don't get along, don't get each other, hate each other, think each other are wrong. And the 9 levels are, and these are used like in legal proceedings, you'll recognize someone. 1 is certainly true. Okay. 2 is true beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the proof in a criminal trial, right? 3 is highly probable, like in a civil suit, like preponderance of the evidence. 4 is probable, like you have probable cause to go search someplace. 5 is indifferent. It could be yes or no. 6 starts going the other way. Improbable, highly improbable, false beyond a reasonable doubt, and certainly false. And part of the problem is with not just racism, but all the isms and our society in general, different groups of people we have overlapping and non-overlapping major premises. Overlapping major premises are if you hold your hand in fire, you will be burned. Okay. Like it doesn't matter what culture you're from, where you are. Oh, no. In our country, we hold our hand in fire and love it. Said no one. Okay. We all share that premise. If you take a big mouthful of air underwater, it's water, you'll drown. No one can breathe underwater and inhale water and live. We all share that major premise. No one can phase through walls. We all use doors. However, when it comes to things like the COVID vaccine will remove your testicles, okay? I could say testicles, right? It will make them fall off. That is a premise that most of us don't share. And so, there's all kinds of them floating around, right? These premises. One of them might be, if you're white and the first words out of your mouth are about basketball, you may be a racist. That's another premise, right? And so everybody has all these premises, not even necessarily the same ones. Some of them are overlapping. Some of them are just completely different, right? And all of these rules, these setups, these if-then statements, these functional relations, right? Some of them are accurate. Some of them are not. And then what we do is we take a flawed major premise, like if you're black, you love basketball, or if you're black, you're good at basketball, or something like that. And then we use correct form deductive reasoning to convince ourselves it's true. Because what people do is they accept the flawed major premise, and then they use proper form deductive reasoning. And then that's it. It's true, right? The problem is we don't examine our major premises that either we extract from the real world or they are handed to us from other people, like rules, Like, be careful of these people. They'll always do X, right? That would be a major premise that may have truthiness along the 1 to 9 scale of who knows what. So, and a lot of racial stereotypes, people's beliefs about different races, different cultures. If you looked at all their beliefs, like laid out on this scale of 1 to 9, absolute certainty, like Highlander, if your head comes away from your neck, it's over. Okay, that would be 1, absolute certainty, right? Everything below that is just it's probabilistic. So, and so many people, like if you were psychotic, you would hold something as absolute certain that like somebody else would hold as absolutely false. That's so, like we were all brought here by aliens and they're going to come back one day and search for their gold. Okay. And so like that would be a premise that not many people would accept. But if you hold that as a 1, people are going to call you crazy. If you say, I know it sounds like a crazy theory, and I only put it as possible, unlikely, but this is what I think. People would think of you differently because you're leaving room for doubt. So anyway, those things fit into all the isms and racism and stereotypes because people are using false major premises, bad logic sometimes, right? To come to these conclusions, sloppy logic.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of the setup.
Yeah.
Bruce, did you want to say anything?
Yeah. So thank you.
I went for a while.
No, take as much time as you need. No, so because you said something very interesting about like it all for racism, it all falls. So this is just my, just how I'm going to just tell you how I view it. So
yeah, for sure.
I compartmentalize racism and folks or people who are racist. We look at people who are maybe racist, and you can operationally define what race people who are racist, and regards to saying an inappropriate racial slur to someone, saying inappropriate responses such as "you don't belong in this neighborhood." You can, in these topographical responses of how the behavior you can operationally define it on what people who are racist, or you can say, fair weather, or they can be prejudiced or have biasness. But when I talk about racism, I look at that as a system. I think racism is a system. I think there's systemic racism, and I think that has to be approached kind of differently. So it's like this whole overarching system, and the way you would define it is like, it's real simple. Like there's laws, that can help support the fact that, there's Jim Crow laws that occurred years ago. Slavery was legal centuries ago. There's other evidence of legal, for legal ramifications that occurred.
Oh yeah, they're called red zone in Miami.
Redlining, yeah.
Redlining, 100%. Yes. Or voter suppression, those things are, for certain demographics of people. So like I said, so that's why I look at like racism is a system. And then there's people who are racist, and the function as far as the people can be different. Some people may want to escape because they had an experience with certain folks, and then that person who may be black may be a CMOR of signals aversiveness, get away from this guy who's black. And then some people may do it for social approval, for attention, like, hey, I want to fit into this maybe group, so I'm going to go out there and just behave this certain way towards this race to get social approval. And then, other people can just be attention. Hey, these folks, if, we give folks from here opportunity, they may be taken away from us. So we want to make sure we have a lot of resources. So function could be the same. But the overarching for function for this whole system, it was originally, which came from slavery, was access, right? I got free labor. I pretty much built a country without having to pay people for centuries. So the whole, that's why. So I think that's where, we have to really break it down. So like this whole thing started with, function based. It was access to resources, access to wealth, access to certain work. And then the people have different functions of how they behave a certain way.
Okay. Yeah. I agree with that. I think that the first book the only book that I really read on racism, which is it was comprehensive, but they did talk about systemic racism, and that most people who believe race is not a problem, That's because they don't understand what systemic racism is. They may say, well, okay, it's not Trevor Noah. He said he preferred the racism of South Africa because it was in your face.
Mm-hmm.
It was right there. It was up front. And he said in America, people are like, oh, there's no problem. But then systemically, it's all there.
Yes.
It's all under, and it's not simply as in like people will say, well, it was just, there was a bad cop. No, there's bad systems. There's bad systems. And those systems, you're absolutely right. They tend not to change. That's what institutions are. They tend to resist change, and they're built to stay the way they are. And this it is part of the problem.
Right. And it's exploitation. And then again, another way you can determine that is you just look at the numbers. We call it disproportionality, right? If you make up a certain percentage, like Black people make up 12% of the American population, right? Mm-hmm. But they make up the majority of incarceration or the majority of dropouts. That's disproportionality. Now, is that saying that these individuals who arrest them, each of them are racist? Absolutely not. But we're talking about a system that can suppress a certain group,
Yeah, and that's I touched on disproportionality as well, and it's an interesting concept because the reason I touched on it is that I'm very interested in how everybody label things, how we tact things differently. And that has a lot to do with bias. It enters into racism. It enters into disproportionality. It enters into fairness. And I think that like at the beginning of the talk, I just used like different words for killing. I called them second order terms. And the reason I call them second order terms, like killing would be like the first level. You stop the life process of a living organism. There's no bias involved in there because it's just like a basic scientific description. You shut the organism off. Okay. But then we have like in our legal system, a multitude of words for killing. And the reason we do is it's based on our okayness with it. So like, if you're okay with it, we call it this. If you're not okay with it, we call it that.
Would the context be perhaps the more applicable than okayness in terms of like, if you're, the context of hunting is different than the context of like, someone getting killed, in a liquor store, robbery or something like that.
It's still a measure of okayness. So what you're saying is like hunting is killing, but we're going to call it a different thing because it's a sport. And so like, and we're cool with it.
And you're not hunting people. It's not some, dystopian sci-fi movie.
Well, right. That's why you can't murder a moose. You can only murder a human. Okay.
You harvest a moose, right?
You could harvest a moose. You can thin out the herd, but you can't murder it. And you can't do moose slaughter either. Those are all reserved for humans. But I mean, just as an example, like murder, that's worse, and we don't approve of that. But manslaughter is like murder light, and I don't like manslaughter because it's a sexist term. I prefer "oops, I murdered again." But it's still
set to music.
Set to music. But here's the point: we as a society are saying this kind of killing isn't as bad because you didn't mean it. So let's give it a different name, okay? And self-defense is also killing. But we're saying it was okay for you to do it. So we're going to give that a different name.
Well, it's the context in which it occurs.
It's a context in which it occurs. And so many legal battles are just, what name can we call it? I mean, those are what the legal battles are, right? Can we call it manslaughter? Oh, no, we can't call it that. And it's just, it's like a fight over what words we're going to use. But somebody's still dead. Mm-hmm. And, but here's the point. Our biases are going to lead us to choose words that reflect those biases. That's why people will say, like, if Bruce were using, say, seclusion and somebody didn't like it, like at his school, not that he does, but if he were, they would call it incarceration, or they would call it, because that's also seclusion. But the reason they would call it incarceration is it's more inflammatory. And it reflects their bias against it, right? Just like if somebody sees restraint, they'll just call it, I've seen people call it torture. And the thing is, they're not the same thing. But the point is, my bias is going to cause me to choose a different word that supports my bias. And, and this is how we kind of, I call it the social frackery. This is how we mess with each other. This is how politicians do it. And that's probably 99% of their job description is figuring out how to retact something so it will sound better or worse than it is. Attorneys are fabulous at doing this. That's like 80% of their job. All right. You're going to call, we both just saw this behavior. I'm going to call it this. You call it something completely different. And then we bring it to a judge, right? This is a lot of our laws.
And you see that up close and personal with some of your legal consultation and expert witness work, right?
Oh, yeah, I do. It's people constantly trying to swing each other by whipping out these words that are just dripping with bias, right? And that's why people do these kinds of things. And it's not really good for any of us, because it's a method of control used by people who don't really understand the relevant arguments that would convince somebody. So what they do is they try to bamboozle us by tacting it differently with a word that has different emotional connotations, right? That's why people will say things like, it wasn't a restraint. It was a restriction of his civil liberties. Okay. I mean, no, that's what, this is the way that it's done. And I'm not saying it's always wrong. Sometimes you need to rebrand it to get attention to it. So we relabel it, right? People relabel things to make them sound less bad. They relabel things to make them sound worse than they actually are. And sometimes we can use these effectively to get things done that we need to. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing that we do this. I think it's just bad that people don't recognize when it's being done to them.
Everyone, one last very, very quick announcement before we wrap the show here. Just if you like the way Merrill thinks about things, and if you want to hear more from him, well, he's going to be one of the speakers at the 2022 Stone Soup Conference coming up on October 22nd, and it'll be available on demand after that as well. So Merrill, again, is just one of a number of amazing speakers they've got lined up, and it's going to be a great event. So just go to the show notes for this episode. You can even just Google Stone Soup 2022. It'll pop right up. It's an amazing event for an amazing cause. The proceeds of the event go to support scholarships for ABA services for individuals in need. And it's just a worthy cause, great speakers at a fantastic price. And if you want to save even more on your registration, use the promo code podcast at checkout to save $20. So that's all I wanted to say. That's it for commercial interruptions for this podcast. Let's get back to the rest of this conversation with Bruce and Merrill. I'm afraid I got you off track, quibbling over terms here, but we were talking about the disproportionality piece of that. Is there more that you want to say about that, Merrill? Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Just that there's two kinds, and there's mathematical disproportionality, and then there's, for lack of a better term, this ain't right disproportionality, which is subjective and has to do with fairness and justice and things like that. So as an example, 80% of BCBAs are female, and it is mathematically disproportionately female. Why? Because only 50% of the population is female. So it is mathematically disproportionately female. Now, is it in a social justice-y way disproportionately female? No, because nobody is screaming and crying that males are losing out. Okay? Males are being oppressed in behavior analysis. Males are being turned away at the job site in droves. Said no one. And so most people would probably use the word mostly, not disproportionately. It's mostly women in behavior analysis. I don't think it's disproportionately in the social justice sense, or in the sense of fairness, too many women in behavior analysis. It's mathematical. So, and as Bruce was saying before, like in prison system, Black Americans make up 12, 13% of the population. But in the prison system, they may be occurring at twice that rate. Now, still,
there are more white people in prison than black people, but it is disproportionately black. So white people would be underrepresented in prison. So if we're 60% of the population, you'd only be 49% in prison. Okay. Black persons would be, if they're 13% of the population, they might be 20 or 25%. So it is, although, because there's not as many black people in the country. So although, yes, there are total more white people in prison, they are underrepresented and black people are overrepresented. It's fairly consistent. The same thing with police shootings. And I had a graphic on that from like 2015 to now, and pretty consistently, white persons are shot well under 60%, and black persons are shot well over 13%. Sometimes it's twice. Mm-hmm. And so it is both a mathematical and a social justice disproportionality. Sometimes you have both. So if that makes sense. My video will come back on in a second. The example I gave, anybody who wants to explain it to someone, whether we feel something is too much or too little, because disproportion has to do with too much. And when you say something is too much, it's a judgment. Like if you say there's a disproportionate amount of cayenne pepper in this chili. Well, you're not making a mathematical statement in all probability. You're saying it's too damn spicy. Well, it's too spicy for you. It's too spicy for you, right? But now if you said this recipe only calls for 1 tablespoon and you have 4, so there's a disproportionate amount of chili powder relative to the other ingredients. So that would be a little bit different. So, or if a water bottle is 3/4 full, if you know nothing about the water bottle or where it came from, you'd probably just say, oh, it's mostly water. But if you had been drinking out of it and it was almost full and now it was 3/4 full, you'd say there's a disproportionate amount of air in this bottle. What do you mean? Well, there shouldn't be that much air. I barely drank anything. Somebody drank my water. So what you do is, here's the other lesson, is that when you see disproportionality and you can't explain it, you come up with crazy things. Okay. You come up with theories to make you feel better again. It's a negative reinforcement paradigm. So let me use the water bottle again. How come that's not supposed to be that little water. There's too little water. I bet someone drank it or someone knocked it over and spilled my water and didn't tell me. You start generating theories. Why? Because the disproportionality bothers you. It's aversive. So what do? You come up with theories that make it go away, right? So back to basketball. How come it's 75% black people in basketball? That doesn't seem right. There's only 13% black people in the country. Maybe they have special thighs that make them jump super high. There was actually a sportscaster, I don't know his name, who got into big trouble for saying that exact thing.
Oh my gosh.
No lie. So here's my point. The disproportionality makes people scratch their head and it makes them uncomfortable. And then they come up with theories to make themselves feel better again. And everybody does this. This shouldn't be like this. Why would this be like this? That's too much of that, right? And we don't like that. We don't like that at all. So anyway.
So you're saying that based on your kind of analysis here, that people come up with theories to make sense of their observations if there's no, in the absence of kind of objective evidence as to why that's the case?
Yeah, absolutely. There's probably somebody out there right now, like it's 98% white people in hockey, okay? It's like less than like 1% black people. There's probably white people out there and going, that's because white people have special ankles that let them skate really. Now, there's probably somebody out there saying something like that to explain the 98% white people in hockey, okay? But anything. Right. But only when it's important to them. Like nobody is, as an example, it's 98% male in construction. Nobody's making wild theories about why it's so many males in construction. Do you know why? Everyone expects males in construction. And nobody drives by a construction site and goes, where's all the women? I mean, there might be somebody who does, but most of us, it is a male role job. That's probably why it's 98% males. It's not necessarily they're turning females away. Maybe they are. I don't know. But just like, again, elementary school teachers are primarily female. The proportions that become male increase as you go up through the educational levels. It's very clear. And so at the very lowest level, kindergarten, pre-K, first, second grade, it's overwhelmingly female, like 85%. And then the proportions change in high school.
Now, Bruce, you mentioned that you taught kindergarten. I have to imagine.
Yeah.
Now,
What the hell, man?
Yeah. you broke through the K ceiling.
Yeah.
So.
Kindergarten cop.
Let me ask you: did people do double takes because there's
yeah, 3 aces in a hole? I was special ed, which is rare. For that elementary, I was a male plus I was black, so it was like whoa. So so that
you were the behavioral unicorn.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But going back to your disproportionality, I think a lot of that too has to do with I think at times, and I'm speaking non-behavior analytically, but I think people try to rationalize certain behaviors based on that. So if the question becomes, why are black people basketball? They have to have different muscles. It's just to justify certain races excelling somewhere else, or maybe back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, the concept was that folks from the black community weren't smart enough to play quarterback. That was a concept because they weren't able to think quickly. So that was kind of the narrative put out there. But to your point, these things are said, I think, to justify placing certain people in positions or not giving people opportunities in certain positions.
Most people don't know this, but the first shot in the NBA, the first basket in the NBA was made by Ozzie Schneckman. And it was Jews. It was all Jews in basketball at the very beginning. And one of the reasons was the Jews lived in the inner cities. Mm-hmm. The Jews were impoverished. And you can read a story about one guy who said, we were so poor, we crumpled up newspaper and we threw it through the bottom rung of a fire escape ladder because we didn't have a basket. Wow. And actually, the kind of basketball they played was actually, and it wasn't meant to be derogatory, it was called Jew ball. And the reason it was called Jew ball is they played in very tight spaces because they didn't even have basketball courts. And it was a passing game. It was very heavily based on passing. But here's the thing. I think it was on the show Adam Ruins Everything on Netflix. Some of the things that were said about the Jews, because there were so many of them playing basketball, they said things like, well, they're really good with numbers, so they can calculate angles and they can figure out, and that's the example of how come there's so many Jews that are good at this. Yeah. And it was an access issue. It's the only game we can play. Right. And I would tell people that, I grew up, I was lower middle class, and I had a park near us with basketball courts. We had no ice rinks. None of my friends skated. We lived in South Florida, and we wouldn't have had the money to buy skates or hockey equipment or any of that. We had enough money for a basketball. And so, it was a similar kind of thing, but people will use this disproportionality to just come up with the craziest theories that make them feel okay about themselves,
Yeah, and then the more obvious kind of environmental explanations are just kind of glossed right over.
I gave one example in the presentation about a hockey player, the first black hockey player in the NHL, and it was the Valmore James, and it just showed how he never would have played hockey because he lived in Ocala, Florida, but his father moved to Long Island and became the caretaker, the manager of an ice arena, and that gave him access. Mm-hmm. And so that it was a nice example how, well, this black kid ended up playing hockey. How did he get there? And it's just he had to overcome these things, right? That were just a given for all the other kids that in his neighborhood where he lived. So it was an interesting, I thought, example of all the stuff he had to overcome, which was geography and poverty and access, and really had certainly no black role models in hockey. He just, he studied under one of the Ducks players. They all liked him, and his father was always at the facility and he was always at the facility. And so he had that mentorship, but, most young black kids wouldn't. Mm-hmm. So that, in that regard.
I want to get back to this, but I have to ask this, Bruce. So I want to get back to your kindergarten experience, because it's been my observations, anecdotal as they are, is that when there is a guy in the, rare as he might be in one of those primary teaching roles, that parents and kids flock to them because of the who knows what, and I'm sure there'll be lots of this is certainly ripe for speculation, but I was just curious if that happened to you. There's been a lot of primary grade male teachers I've known that once the word gets out, everyone wants to be in Mr. Smith's classroom or something like that, and I'm just curious if that jives with your experiences and observations.
Oh yeah, and listen, it was like I told you, if I ever needed my ego stroked, you just come to work every day when I was a kindergarten teacher, because the kids were great, the families were great. It was, to your point, it was like they saw you like a rock star because you're big, you're tall, and you're in a field that's not a lot of men. I think I was like one of two men in my whole school because there's not a lot of men teachers, particularly at the elementary level. Okay. So it was a pretty awesome experience. But yeah, you did see that. You saw a lot of the young children, gravitate and flock, to the classroom because they just felt like, this is some of our kids, where I worked was kind of a lower socioeconomic environment, aspects of rural, and also some where it was like located kind of like in the city. So it was kind of like lower. So like some of our kids had, father figures in their home, which is great. And some of the kids may not have. So some of the kids who may not were more apt to go out there and just, and I don't know if they saw me as like this, father. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it was definitely a lot of rapport building with, all the students in there. And it was a special moment because, like I said, early childhood was an awesome, the primary age is fantastic. And I recommend that if men want to be a teacher, definitely go in it because you can make a lot of impact, particularly at a young age. You can shape a lot of their behaviors.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's an awesome experience.
So again, I kind of got us off track from the presentation, but I just want to kind of pause on that return to that just for a second. But Merrill, your presentation talked, and I don't know if I'm transitioning too early or not, but so if there's anything left to talk about disproportionality, have at it. But I know the kind of concluding section of your talk talks about avatars and other sorts of things. So I want to dig into that as well.
Sure. So the avatars and hate crimes, avatars I just used in the same concept that other people use it, something that represents, right? It's not you, but it's something that represents you. And so what I said was like, an avatar is like an amalgam, a stereotype, if you will, that we have. And here's just the way I use the concept is we have an avatar for everybody that we interact with that we don't know well. So like the person checking us out at the grocery store. If they're not being super personable and they're just going through their regular things, did you find everything that you needed today? You're just interacting with an avatar. You're just, this is this person. This is this is their job. This is all they do here. This is what I do.
I think they call those non-player characters, right?
And NPCs. I actually use that in the presentation. So they're like an NPC. They're a non-playable character, right? And so the thing is, and they don't really become a human until they do this. Oh, I got these cookies. They're really good. They also have this other flavor, and they all of a sudden they're like a human. But that's kind of the thing. And we have an avatar for everyone. So the person who like cut you off, you already have an avatar for who they are, the kind of driver they are, the kind of inconsiderate person they are, who they probably voted for. This is what people do to get them through their day. And this is kind of like what stereotypes are about. So the example I give is everybody think of the avatar soccer mom. Just close your eyes and think about a soccer mom. And I go, what does she look like? What color is her hair? Approximately how old is she? What race is she? What's she wearing? And then I showed this picture that I pull up on Google when you type in soccer mom. And it's like a 35-year-old woman with a sweater wrapped around her neck, and she's blonde and she's got a soccer ball in her hand. And she looks like she just came from Starbucks. And my point was that Google is telling us who a soccer mom is, because the first picture that came up was not somebody from Asia. It was not a Black person. It was not a Mexican person. It was a white lady. Okay. And when you look at soccer is everywhere outside of the United States. So, mostly. And so soccer mom is a white lady. But my point is that's what an avatar is. So if I said like, hey, this dude's coming over later, he's kind of a nerd. As soon as I say that, you have an image of like tape on the glasses, pocket protector. He's going to talk about anime and video games and tech. And you already know kind of what they look like and kind of what they sound like. You have a little picture pop up in your head because you haven't seen them. So you need something to represent them. Like when you read a story and you're imagining who the main character looks like, avatars are like that, right? Somebody says something. It's a Black person. It's a Jewish person. It's a woman. It's a man. They're gay. Okay. You have boom, avatar pops up, right? Something has to fill in the void, typically. So anyway, and people have those for kind of, everything. So the next part was about, are there avatars within race? And there are, because there's things called colorism, where people in the same race, you're not Black enough, you're too Black, you're too white, Anderson Cooper. Okay, this kind of thing, right? By the way, he dressed up as a White Walker from Games of Thrones, and he loved it. What a great sport. And the glasses kind of gave it away when he was in the makeup, but I have a picture of it. It's really pretty cool. But yeah, there are avatars within race. And I talked to people who got accused by other people in the race, stuff like, you're not really Black because you don't have a Black husband, or you're not really this because of this, or you're not really that because of that. And all they're really saying is, you don't fit my personal avatar. You don't fit my personal avatar, because there is no necessarily universal one kind of a thing. And so that was kind of another one that we have this, what people should be, like avatars within race, that kind of thing. Did you want to comment any on that, Bruce, or did you?
No. You keep going. That was great. I mean, in regards to that, as far as I just thought when I was listening to your presentation, I thought that was very interesting as far as the avatar. And
I know some people project them as well, and they would use the term code switching. So like, I'm going to project the avatar. I'm going to talk like a white guy. Or I'm going to talk without the white guy voice.
Right.
But that's projecting an avatar too. I do it as well. If I am talking to like direct care staff, I'm super, super casual. I use ain't right. Because I feel uncomfortable if I don't actually. Right. It just feels more comfortable, and everyone else seems to be more comfortable. But I mean, that's the same kind of thing. I'll have an avatar I present in court, which is a lot less sarcastic.
Yeah.
You know?
And
I know, and just more formal. And so, I mean, everybody has them, and everybody so we can make our own and project it. But the other problem is people project their avatar onto us. So like when you're a behavior analyst and you go into the classroom, and like, as soon as you see the teacher and they go, okay, they've just projected an avatar on you. They know, oh, you're a behavior analyst. You're going to ask me to do this. You're going to want to see my data. You're going to talk about reinforcement. You're going to blame me for doing things wrong. And the thing is, they have an avatar for behavior analysts if they haven't worked with like a good one, right? And so what people do is, if you had great experiences, maybe you get to know the person well, and then you destroy your avatar of them. You don't need it anymore. You make it broad enough, or you just destroy it altogether. Right. But if it's something where the whole interaction was a turnoff and it went bad and it was never good, then you have like kind of an ugly avatar of the person. And so when somebody says, oh, this is Maddie's behavior analyst, they get like stank face. They just go kind of like that, which is all the bias and everything in there. And basically, the way I say it is, an avatar is not as simple as judging a book by its cover. It's more like you've written a short story about somebody you know nothing about,
Mhm.
and you're operating under that short story about the person. You know?
Right.
I'm going to engage in some wild speculation here. So,
That's all I do.
So for folks looking for a real, extensive baby law, reference list that's going to back up these thoughts, you might be disappointed. But I have to imagine, that evolutionarily there might have been some value of creating these kind of quick shorthands for unfamiliar people.
Sure.
You
have to respond quick. Everything we do has an adaptive function, just like the fear response. The question is, does it get out of hand?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, here in New Hampshire, we have an avatar for people from Massachusetts.
Oh boy.
And it goes both ways, because I'm originally from Massachusetts. So when like people from like New Hampshire and Maine were doing their touristy things in my town that I grew up in, I'm like, oh man, it's the damn tourists are here, and they're going to be driving slow and they're going to be rude and blah, 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 blah. And then now I'm, doing it just in the other direction. And it's one of those things that's easy to slip into if you don't catch yourself doing it. Like, hey, so sometimes I have this kind of, sometimes I'll kind of go with it. It's just some, we call them, mass holes, even though I once was one. But
you're a recovering mass hole?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just one of those things, and I've talked to friends from different parts of the country, and I think, a lot of places where states borders are close to one another, there are similar things, like, people from Wisconsin and Illinois and things like that, but it's one of those things you have to be aware and kind of catch yourself. I'm like, oh, I'm doing that thing again where I'm, reacting negatively to this person that I don't even know, yada, yada, yada,
Sure. Oh, 100%. And I think that's a great example that you just gave about, New Hampshire and Massachusetts and folks traveling up there. I think when it comes to like race or, conflict of folks from different areas or regions, whether different or within the same race, I think all those things, occur. The difference is, in just my professional opinion, when we talk about race, the significant difference is this. There's always conflict between folks, whether, again, region, race, or gender. The question becomes, is one group systemically suppressing another group or not allowing them to have access to certain wealth or resources? And that's when it becomes much more problematic, because there's always conflict within different, again, gender, race, folks in different regions.
It's not like Republicans are hoarding resources from Democrats.
Correct.
No, it's
right.
It's so, yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it back to that. That's obviously way more important. I can tie it, a little bit together in the end with, I talked about hate crimes, and basically, I just wanted to say that it's basically functionally equivalent to terrorism, even though terrorism is typically a political statement, in as much as you are attacked for a condition, not for your actions. So hate crimes are just like that. So you are attacked for a condition. You didn't do anything to anybody. You have a condition. You're Black, you're gay, you're Jewish. Okay. It's as opposed to, and what they said is, what the FBI says is, the reason that hate crimes have a special category is they pose a threat to an open and pluralistic society, which is ours. So what it means is, I can't feel safe as a law-abiding citizen, right, because of these hate crimes. Like, I don't punch anybody. I pay my taxes. I'm a good citizen. Oh, that doesn't matter. Somebody may try and shoot you or kill you based on a condition. So, and that's the threat to the pluralistic society. It's just like terrorism. What it means is you can't feel safe walking down the street. And that's why, to me, beyond question, they're equivalent.
Well, it's kind of considered domestic terrorism, that's exactly what it is too. And just to clear your point up, just for the folks listening, you're not saying being Black is a condition. You're just referencing at the folks who are engaging in these behaviors are
right.
looking at as a condition.
Yes. Yeah. But it's a state. So it's like now could be a condition that is unchangeable, like being black, or it could be being a Democrat. And some of the conditions, they can only find out when they get information from you, like your sexual orientation or something.
Right.
So, but one of the problems that makes racism so big is that the conditional discrimination is visual. Nobody has to say anything. And this is a point that I make. In some parts of the country, I can't get into trouble unless I open my damn mouth. Okay. So that's not true for somebody for whom it is a conditional visual discrimination. And that's why I think that it's even worse with racism. You don't even have to get next to the person. You don't have to talk to the person.
Yeah, I also think when you said you're totally right about the visual aspect, the stimulus, right? You see something, you see someone who looks different, you can just discriminate one race from another. But also, too, if you are an employer and you may have some biases, reading someone's name.
Oh, yes.
Okay, can also be discriminatory. Yep. If you say, hey, this person has a name that's kind of threatening to me or something I don't really want my organization, these things happen.
A buddy of mine knows a black lady who recently changed her first name to Shirley. It was not Shirley.
Right.
And it's sad that that was her decision. That's sad that she felt she had to do it. Yeah. But the whole name thing, it is a big deal. I think they said it was something like it counted for like 5 to 7% of people who didn't get hired had to do with the name that they saw.
Oh, no question.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So sure. And that's like when people say like, well, I'm colorblind. Oh, are you culture blind? Are you the way someone sounds blind? It's not simply right. People make all kinds of discriminations. Yeah.
Right. There's no such thing as colorblind, obviously.
Well, there is protanopia, which my stepson Weston has, which means he has problems with green and red, but he totally sees black. So, yeah.
Oh. So I think that's a good segue, guys. I'm curious. We've been talking about like kind of going back and forth between very kind of theoretical things and conceptual things, and also very concrete examples and whatnot. But as it relates to the practice of behavior analysis, what do we make of this in terms of our field? And I know that's kind of a very open question, but what I guess some of the implications I'm wondering about, there's a lot of talk, like if we're an organization, if you're a leader of an organization and you want to make sure, like how do you incorporate maybe some of these themes or concepts into leadership and management practices to foster environments that are inclusive and welcoming and fair and all those things? What are some perhaps some take home lessons from either some of the things we've already discussed or other concepts and principles that we may not have brought up yet?
Have you ever heard of a gentleman named Daryl Davis?
Yes.
Okay, so Daryl. Okay. Well, for those who don't know, Daryl Davis is a black male. Believe it or not, he infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan.
He got their robes back from someone.
Yes, he did. So part of his journey that he would go to rallies, and when he would go to rallies, obviously, they did not welcome him at the rallies. So he was standing on the outside. Folks had shotguns, told him, you need to get away, otherwise X will happen. However, he continuously came back. So he went from outside then to like right now closer to the Klansmen, just trying to, analyze them, interview them. And what did you start seeing? Like slowly start shaping the Klansman behavior. So what happens with it? He started slowly coming. Now he was outside the building at the rallies. Now he was inside interviewing. They allowed him to go in there. Then after continuously having conversation, then he started interviewing like the head Klansman. Started talking to him, interviewing him. Slowly but surely, long story short, and I highly recommend folks just Google Daryl Davis. He's on TED Talk. He's on YouTube. It's an awesome documentary. Long story short, after all, he shaped all these responses to the point where multiple Klansmen, even the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, submitted their robes to him. They started slowly coming to his house for dinner. He's going to their house for dinner, and he's even the godfather to one of the Klansmen. So I think we talked about before too, I kind of compartmentalize racism versus folks who engage in racist behaviors. As a behavior analyst, I just, challenge folks to just, again, these response, as a behavior analyst, you're kind of the expert in teaching, right? It's a science of teaching, science of learning. So you can start using the principles to help shape responses for individuals. And I think you do that through certain principles of the science of applied behavioral analysis to really help shape certain behaviors, shape the culture. For certain individuals, I think that's what you can do to help support and shape. Now, when we talk about racism, the system, these are for all my OBM folks. Okay. I'm looking at really just like how to address the system. That's going to take much more comprehensive, I think much more expertise, much more behavior analysts working together, and just much more as far as grassroots movement to really help support this whole system that helps suppress folks from the Black community and other communities and other genres as well too. So I just think that's how you do it. So for as a behavior analyst, I think just from what we take, and this is my perspective, I'm just speaking, I just think like using the science for individuals to help shape their responses, help shape their behaviors. And I think that's just we start. And then for like as an organizational leader, I'm a leader, obviously, again, to your point is, allowing folks, you could talk about cultural competency training, that's very important too. But those are very, very critical things too. Like when we say DEI, like diversity, equity, inclusion, for organizations, can you please mean it? Like, let's really mean this and really have these open dialogues. Let's look for more transparency, put folks in more leadership positions of color, because it's great when you talk about DEI, right? It's wonderful. But the people who call the shots all kind of look the same, So we got to make sure that we really enforce and really support folks with diverse backgrounds to really make the decisions and have the dialogue, And I'm not saying it's bad to have folks, but just, try to really make it more inclusive and have folks at the top level, leadership level, to go out there and really make a change. Because obviously, if folks in a certain community, particularly in the Black community we're talking about, right, have more representation at these conversations at the table to make more decisions, because they have more of awareness of what's going on in their own communities. What's going to help support the communities as well too.
Yeah, I think that I think what's important for behavior analysts, well, one of the things is the concept of bias in terms of, and this is the way I'll explain it, that everything you love, everything you hate, and everything you fear, and how it affects how you label things, how you interpret things, what you defend, what kind of new information you accept. And that includes even being excited about someone's new assessment tool. That is, the more excited you are about it, the more you'll be blinded to the problems that it has. It's just the nature of reinforcement. The more you love something, the more you won't see its shortcomings. And so, this bias that we have, I think it permeates so much of behavior analysis now. And that if we check that, we not only help stem racism, but we become better behavior analysts, because we're actually kind of seeing, what am I actually responding to? What do I actually think? What major premise am I actually operating under? Like, if I said it out loud, would it even make sense? Like these kinds of things. The other thing that I was thinking is that, I'm sorry, regarding the biases. I lost it for a second. Oh, this has to do with the cultural sensitivity. I was talking to somebody at a school system where I'm helping them rewrite some of their policies, and they talked about cultural competencies and the parents. And I said, you might have to get into something deeper, like what are the belief systems of the parents? What major premises do they have about bad behavior? how should children be handled, and what are the parents' reinforcers and aversives, and what do they love, fear, and hate? And is it significantly different from the people in the school? Because if it is, then you have people that don't agree sometimes with what's being done, or if it needs to be done, or how it should be done. And I think that sometimes people don't take into account not simply, that somebody's from a different culture or a difference in language, but even how we had this discussion the other day, even how language affects how you interpret reality and how you see causality. Just, as an example, like in Spanish, in English, we would say, I dropped the glass. In Spanish, the way it comes out is the glass fell from my hand, which sounds like you don't really responsible for it. And just happened. The glass fell from my hand. But that little twist of phrase, I don't think that they're all said like that. I think you can purposely say, I let it go. But that's just generally how people talk. So like the glass fell from my hand sounds like you didn't do anything wrong at all. But that's the language. That's the language. And so it's not simply, I don't understand your English words. It's my language, the syntax we use, the phrases we use, the sayings, cause me to look at things slightly differently than someone else. And if you don't catch that, you have it's a communication problem, but not simply, oh, I don't know what that word means. It's a communication problem in terms of fundamentally misunderstanding what somebody thinks about a situation. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I think we could, as behavior analysts, could do a lot better job of assessing what is the family's reinforcers, aversives, fears. What kind of rules do they have? Do they live by it? Mm-hmm. You could translate that as values, but they're all knowable,
right.
Talk to people. But anyway, that's kind of what I think that maybe some implications for us.
Yeah.
I see. We're coming up on the time here, guys. I have just a couple more questions though. One question for you, Merrill, one question for you, Bruce, but I'll start with Merrill. So Merrill, I was just curious, what sort of feedback have you gotten on this talk?
It's kind of interesting. Like when I first started to do it, I was bouncing off with my friends, and like almost all the white people were like, oh, well, that's interesting, but man, I don't know. That sounds kind of scary. and then every black person I talked to, the response was pretty much the same. And it sounded like this: thank you. Mm-hmm. So that was pretty much it. It was, thank you for saying this. I wish somebody would, or thank you for talking about it. Thank you for bringing it up. Thank you for making it a topic. And they would volunteer things to me. Like when I went over the, how the United States defines what race is, a behavior analyst came up to me who's Arabic and Arabian, and I'm sorry, and he was like, I don't really fit into any of these categories, and kids used to call me these all kinds of names, and and it was, even though our country would technically call him white because he's from like Saudi Arabia, Egypt area, his family was. Even though his skin is very dark, but it's just, those kinds of like bizarre things but people would tell me stuff like that, or that they were mixed race, and people would say things to them like, you're not really this, you're not really that, and that they really appreciated it because they struggled with some of these things. Another woman, she told me that she thanked me because she said, now I can explain to my family what they really didn't get. And it was about the disproportionality, like their family wasn't getting the point she was making, and it was frustrating for her. And that was really gratifying because it is now somebody could communicate to her own family some things they didn't understand about race, so that was gratifying. But yeah, generally the feedback has been good. People were just happy that I started, and I hope other people like do more about it, that are like, kind of like deep talks about this that make people think and contribute and, wonder about your own racism and what you accept and what you believe and what people have fed you and what the media does, so it's, so anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Good. I'm glad to hear it was positive.
Yeah. Generally speaking.
Well, I was one of the folks he's talking about because I'm the one. I was
most positive.
I was like, hey, we got to get this conversation rolling and don't stop.
Yeah, and that's just one last point I wanted to make. That I used the phrase social entropy in the presentation, and entropy is just everything going to garbage if you don't put energy into it. It's like your room. If you don't clean it, it looks messier and messier and messier. This is entropy. It happens to everything. And that I believe that all the isms, including racism, of course, they're the social entropy default. Once you have two groups that are discernible along any dimension, it doesn't matter who they are. They could be behavior analysts and teachers. Now we have two groups. Who are you? We're teachers. Who are you? We're behavior analysts. Did something go wrong? Yeah. Whose fault is it? Behavior analysts. So as soon as you have two groups, now blame has somewhere to go. And that's where it starts. And that people learn blame at very early ages. I've even seen nonverbal children pointing at the other one when mommy says, who did this? Because they learn if you point at the other one, mommy stops looking at you and she looks at your sibling. Okay. And it gets reinforced. And it starts with this concept of, I need someone else to blame. And that doesn't explain all of racism, but it explains a lot of it. And in fact, any kind of two groups of people, religious groups, it doesn't matter, right? We're so into blaming people, and racism is one of the easiest things to reach for because I just need to see what you look like. You know, I don't need to have a discussion with you. And that's why it's so insidious. You know, I think it's one of the reasons anyway, but yeah. And because it is entropy, we need to constantly put effort into it constantly. And that is, the idea is you don't fix racism. Right. You don't beat racism. Racism is not gone. It's like terrorism. You cut off the head and something else grows up. It's a default for humans. And that means you constantly need energy to put into the system to fight it. Otherwise, it takes over like kudzu. If you're from Alabama, you know what that is.
I recall the evil plant. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that was my final thing. Yeah, and we all need to fight social entropy. And if you don't, it wins. Pretty much. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Bruce.
Well, thanks, gentlemen. Bruce, thank you so much for telling me to do this.
Oh yeah. Well, hey, we got one more question. So Bruce, you get to get to take us out. On this show. Yeah. So it's time for Bruce's advice for the newly minted BCBA or behavior analysts of any experience level for that matter. So if you have a chance to, and I know you mentor and lead other behavior analysts, so you have probably have some thoughts in this matter. So what would you say to someone who just got their BCBA, or what would your message be more generally to any behavior analyst you're likely to encounter?
My advice would be just get connected with a lot of folks who are smarter than you and who has much more experience, and learn from them. I think any newly minted BCBA should really network and go to conferences, whether virtual, in person, and continue to network and network not only with folks within your concentration area, but just start learning how to expand out and get learn and get support from other behaviors with different concentration, just to enhance your experience. Continue to read. I recommend just reading journal articles, books. Just to continue, just to enhance your skill set as a behavior analyst in this field. It's a beautiful science. And I think a lot of behavioral change occurs if procedures and the technology aspect is conducted the right way. So I just, as a newly minted BCBA, connect with a lot of the folks, a lot of the experts in the field, get to know them, reach out to them. Every BCBA that I have met at the top of the game, they have been very, very receptive. Merrill, Winston, yourself, Matt, just folks who just very open. This field, from my experience, has been very receptive as far as supporting. So I just continue to get support, enhance your skills, stay sharp.
All right.
And the last question is when you said about the ones who's been in the field for a long time. Just last thing, again, since we're on this topic about that too, if the MO is not established as far as like the motivation operation in regards to what we were just talking about, then obviously, but if you are led or if you're motivated to really support this conversation we had, do not be shy. Like, approach this. I always say, as the behavior analyst, your job is to change behavior. Mm-hmm. So if you see certain things in the workforce or in the community, be an agent of change. Don't shy away from conflict. Don't shy away from, any change. So just use the science, use the procedures to really make the change, even if it's uncomfortable. Because in order to make the environment a comfortable environment, we got to start off, making it a little bit uncomfortable. And again, use the science and use the interventions to help support, so we can have a better environment to improve conditions.
Awesome. Great advice to take us out with. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the time.
Thanks a lot, Bruce. Thanks, Matt. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.